Thank you for joining us on this fine spring evening. My name is Kike Roach, and I'm the new Unifor Sam Guindon Chair in Social Justice and Democracy at Ryerson University. I would like to start with the Statement of Acknowledgement of Traditional Land. We wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this land. Welcome, everyone, to tonight's debate on the universal basic income, a way forward for the left. And there is a question mark at the end of that phrase, because this is indeed a debate. This debate is brought to you by The Leap and the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty, and co-sponsored by the Ontario Public Interest Research Group, Toronto, the Ontario Public Service Employees Union, Local 586, Ryerson's Department of Politics and Public Administration, the Ryerson Centre for Policy Innovation and Public Engagement, and the Guindon Chair. I would like to take a moment to thank all of the volunteers for all their hard work putting this together. Can we give them a round of applause, please? For those of you who enjoy tweeting, we are tweeting tonight at #BasicIncome. In a moment, I will introduce our moderator and participants, but before we launch into the arguments for and against and wrestle with what policy that might move us forward to a better and more just society, I would like to ask you to reflect on this. Toronto is experiencing some of its highest rates of homelessness in years. Just a couple of days ago, Nurse Kathy Crow pointed out that 7 names were added to the Homeless Memorial in April. And this month is not even over. 7 people in April died without a place to call home. I would ask us to take a moment of silence to remember those who have died on the streets of Toronto. Thank you. They say that in the next 10 to 20 years, robots and advanced technology are going to take over maybe 40% or more of the jobs that people currently do. They say that we should get used to the idea that short-term contracts and precarious work are here to stay. And we've known all along that the amount of money people receive through Ontario Works and the Ontario Disability Support Program has been far too low. How do we address these and other issues to make sure that, quote, everyone has an income sufficient to meet basic needs and can live with dignity regardless of their work status, unquote? For many, introducing a universal basic income is a solution. Now, this idea is not a new one. It's been around for decades, but has recently become more popular with, again, various authors, politicians, experts here and in other countries debating the issue. And of course, the Ontario government has announced a pilot project to test the basic income out on a small group of people. So the questions are many. Will a basic income mean less poverty, less intrusion by government bureaucrats into people's lives, greater stability and predictability, allowing folks to better manage their lives and take advantage of new opportunities while enjoying more financial independence? That sounds pretty good. But some might wonder, can a capitalist country with governments that always seem to cater to big businesses' interest first really be trusted to provide ordinary people with an income that is enough for everyone to live a decent life and thereby resist working for low wages, and no benefits? Will the government give with one hand and take away with the other, cutting back on funding for robust public services like healthcare, transportation, and free education once the basic income is rolled out? Well, with us here tonight to debate these important questions is an all-star panel. And we have to your left, Josephine Gray, Guy Caron, Avi Lewis, John Clark, and Jessica Sikora. Josephine Gray is a founder of Low Income Families Together. Josephine has worked locally and globally as a human rights organizer for 30 years, as a survivor and lone parent of 4 children, and has been appointed Canada's observer to the United Nations World Summit Social Development. She's currently working in her community of St. Jamestown on the Oasis Food Hub project for climate-resilient food sovereignty. Please welcome Josephine Gray. Next to Josephine is Guy Caron. Guy Caron is a 2-time MP for the Eastern Quebec riding of Rimouski, Nejet, Témiscouata, Les Basques, and has served as the NDP's critic for finance, industry, and natural resources. An economist by training, Guy is currently running for the leadership of the Federal New Democratic Party and has proposed the introduction of a basic income supplement for all Canadians living below the low-income cutoff. Please welcome Guy Caron. I will come back to our moderator, Avi Lewis, and I will introduce our other debater here, John Clark. John Clark became involved in anti-poverty struggles in 1983 when he helped the Union of Unemployed Workers in London, Ontario. In 1990, he moved to Toronto to become an organizer with the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty, and he has worked with OCAP ever since to mobilize poor people under attack. Please welcome John Clark. Jessica Sikora is sitting next to John Clark. Jessica is the president of the Ontario Public Service Employees Union, Local 586, which represents over 400 staff of the Ministry of Community and Social Services. She was recently elected to serve on the OPSU Executive Board. Jessica has been a frontline ODSP worker since 2009, and she believes that open dialogue and collaboration between workers and recipients is essential to fix the deep inadequacies of our current social assistance system. Please welcome Jessica Sikora. And the man who will help keep all of this running smoothly is, of course, Avi Lewis. Avi Lewis is the strategic director and co-founder of The Leap. He's also director of feature documentaries, This Changes Everything in 2015, and The Take in 2004. In his roles as television journalist and host, local news reporter, music journalist, debate show host, public speaker, and activist, he has created space to bring more radical voices and ideas to the mainstream for over 25 years. Please welcome Avi Lewis. Thank you. Have a good debate.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Why should I waste a good phrase? Thanks for coming out for an evening of unabashed wonkery. Can we get a round of applause for unabashed wonkery? Yeah. No, it is impressive to have hundreds and hundreds of people come out for a policy question. It always reaffirms my faith in democracy that we want to gather around these critical conversations that need more space in our culture. Rabble is recording this for a podcast. Leftstream is recording video. I want to thank our allies in the independent media who bring these important conversations that, for instance, the public broadcaster might spend a little more time on, but that's another story. We're going to pass the hat later on because it's a volunteer event and there was some money that we had to spend to put all this on. So I'm just warning you in advance. And we're going to start by taking the temperature of the room on the question of basic income. You've all got little cards that you got when you came in. If you're in favor of basic income, this is where we're starting. This is our control group tonight, pre-debate. Hold up the green card, the red card if you're against it, and just stick up your hand if you're in the middle and not sure. So let's all vote. And I'm seeing it's not a field of green. It's like a scrubby early spring lawn with lots of patches where there are some red. But I would say we've got, panel, help me out, maybe 60, 70% of the room is for basic income? Is that fair to say? How many people are sticking up their hands? Okay, put down your cards, and just let's see the people who are on the fence. Okay, so we've got maybe a quarter of the people here who are starting on the fence, quarter, something like that. Okay, good to know. I put up my hand because although I have moderated hundreds and hundreds of live nationally televised debates in my dubious career, this is actually the first one where I don't know where I stand. It's never happened to me before. I am genuinely on the fence on this debate. The LEAP Manifesto, one of the many partners, the LEAP organizing crew, one of the many partners co-sponsoring this event, is a document that contains 15 very forthright political demands. The one about basic income is the only one where weasel words appear in the LEAP Manifesto, where there is some hedging. I'm just going to read the demand of the LEAP as part of the context for tonight. Demand number 13 is, since so much of the labor of caretaking, whether of people or the planet, is currently unpaid and often performed by women, we call for a vigorous debate about the introduction of a universal basic annual income. The LEAP, of course, is a consensus document. Dozens of social movement leaders from across Turtle Island and from a whole span of issues came together around this wording, and it was a negotiated text. And so the question of the call for a debate on basic income is not as fiery and ambitious a demand as the others in the manifesto, because it is a genuine debate. The last thing I want to establish before we get into the content of tonight is that this is a debate among allies. Everyone on this panel is on the progressive/left side of the political spectrum, reflecting, I think, the need for a conversation on the left about basic income. We're going to see an experiment here in Ontario by a Liberal government. We have governments from a spectrum of political orientations around the world who are interested in experimenting on basic income. But the question of whether or not it is a fundamentally progressive policy that challenges power and really redistributes wealth in a frighteningly and unacceptably unequal society, that's what we're really here to debate tonight. That's a debate that can only happen among allies. And so the tone, I hope, will be spirited, it will be passionate, it will be respectful, and there is unlikely to come to blows, I think. Unlike the kind of environment that I've so often tried to create on talk shows. And it's very, very timely to have this conversation. Apparently, in just a week from now, the Wynne government, the Liberal government here in Ontario, is going to announce some details about the 3-year pilot project that they are about to embark on, designed by the Conservative Senator Hugh Segal. So let's dive in. The last caveat is there's a lot of jargon in this subject. I'm going to appeal to the panelists now to avoid acronyms so that we all know what we're talking about. There's LICOs and LIMS and ODSP and all of the shorthand that people use in this conversation. Let's try to use the full phrase to make sure that everyone in the audience and for posterity knows what it is we're on about. In the spirit of a slightly unconventional debate, I think the case for basic income is kind of out there in the culture. Most people here know more or less what the idea is. So I'm going to propose that we actually start with the negative. And then we'll go around. The speakers will have 5 minutes for the first salvo, and then we're just going to have a relaxed conversation, and later on we'll invite you into the conversation, and things will get interesting. Ready? John Clark, what is your problem with basic income?
Well, it's funny you ask. When it comes to basic income, I think that all of the progressive attempts to establish the case for a progressive basic income all are very strong on talking about the positive benefits of doing so, but correspondingly weak when it comes to grappling with the actual societal context, the obstacles and the possibilities. And I think this actually reflects a kind of a disorientation that has arisen in the left based on real setbacks and defeats at the hands of the austerity agenda. There is this sense that we haven't been able to stop it, but maybe there's a kind of a social policy end run around it that will make it better. And I don't think that's realistic. Income support programs have always been set as low as possible, as reluctant concessions by the state, to ensure that the economic coercion element that is so vital to the job market is left intact, and that people are still forced to take low-paid work. And the neoliberal years that we have lived through have intensified that enormously. There has been the gutting of social programs, and particularly income support programs, and it has led to an explosion of low-paid and precarious work. And in this context, there is advanced by the political right a notion of basic income, where you provide a small payment and a dwindling payment to people. It's low enough that people still have to take low-paid jobs, but it functions as a kind of a de facto wage top-up to low-paying employers, so that the capacity to increase low wages and raise the minimum wage is undermined. And at the same time, they're very clear on this. It doesn't augment existing systems of social provision. It replaces them. And some very evil people are cooking this up at the moment. The International Monetary Fund economists are talking about it. The World Economic Forum crowd got together at Davos and had a workshop on basic income. I think it was next door to the one on death squads. And the Finnish government, even as it privatises the country's employment services, is testing basic income. And of course, this wily fox regime of austerity and privatisation that we have in Ontario is now going down exactly the same road. And yet somehow it's suggested on the left that that doesn't really matter because our vision is different and we can just make sure that it happens in a different way. Candidly, if the cops are knocking on your door, you may prefer that they were there to return your lost wallet, but if you come to arrest you, they're going to put the handcuffs on you regardless. And that's how I feel about this basic income. Unless you can show how you imagine you're going to achieve from governments like the ones we have a redistributive program that will roll back the austerity agenda, then we better understand that what's being prepared is a neoliberal attack. They're renaming it basic income. But for us to put down a welcome mat for it rather than fight it would be a profound mistake, in my opinion.
Unfortunately, and as usual, John has come to equivocate and offer you only ambiguous thoughts. What do you really feel? John, just be honest. You're among allies here. Josephine, that was rather convincing. I know that you've been thinking about the basic income question for a long time. So I'm happy to stay at the high level just now because Guy will take us into a specific proposal. But what's the basic case for basic income?
Well, I have a lot of sympathy for John's position. I know that we've been suffering through decades of neoliberal nonsense. But I also want to point out that the idea of a basic income is actually hundreds of years old, and it's been raised many times by people who are very dedicated to human rights, and that's where I come at it from that perspective. I see it as a... Sorry.
Just keep talking.
Okay. I see it as a solid foundation for individual and collective economic security. I see it as an income system that would no longer create paper tigers to chase you through jungles of red tape. I see it as a policy that would, I understand that people think, well, if the libertarians are into it, it must be bad. But at the same time, I would rather see a liberating safety net than a safety net that chokes you. And having been a recipient, I can tell you that if we just simply raise the rates, that doesn't stop a lot of the problems who've been on systems have encountered. So, for example, a computer glitch, you don't get your check, you lose your apartment, and it's a big, long fight to be able to get your nasty little bit of money. I think it's really important for us to recognize that there are so many things changing at this point. The current generation that is raising families is faced with chronic insecurity, precarious work, housing that's way out of reach, a whole bunch of things. And I have to say, I don't think the basic income is a silver bullet. It's not a panacea. It's not the only answer. But in the 21st century, we have to get away from this idea that there is any one single answer. I think it is a tool in a bigger kit. I think it is an ingredient in a larger strategy that we really must consider as an important way in which to, for instance, transition our economy from supporting many destructive livelihoods or requiring people to engage in destructive, insecure livelihoods and allowing them to have the time to breathe and think about how could they enter into green jobs or things that are more sustainable. It would allow young people to maybe take some, unusual or unorthodox career paths towards, more inventive and innovative kinds of livelihoods, like starting co-ops or creating new ways of providing food security, for example. I'm involved in the Food Security Project in a poor neighborhood, and it's incredibly difficult for the people in my neighborhood to, even though they want this project, it's very hard for them to find the time to be involved in it because they're constantly scrambling from one shitty job to another to make, their bills paid and stuff like that. So I think it's incredibly important for us to look beyond just income and recognize that there's freedom, potentially, if it's done correctly. If it is an adequate basic income, if we embed it in human rights principles and demand that it is part of a human rights strategy, that it cannot be brought in on the basis of creating more problems. And I would argue that even right now, as they talk about testing a pilot, and they're saying, well, it should start at $1,300 a month, to me, this is the admission that obviously the current welfare system is grossly inadequate. And if they're willing to admit that it's grossly inadequate, then that gives John and the rest of us some really strong arguments to stand on that the rates should be raised right now because obviously it's grossly inadequate or you wouldn't be piloting something that starts at $1,300 a month. So I think we can look at that from two directions. And it's really up to us to realize that if we were to demand that human rights were embedded in our governance and that as we shift to a more climate resilient and sustainable form of economy and society, there's a lot of ways in which we can mitigate against the risks of a basic income. I do have to say that I don't see how the current income systems could possibly get much worse. So I, find it difficult to imagine how just improving the rates a little bit here and there is going to address so many issues. For example, farmers don't get enough money to eat, to survive. Creatives, artists, musicians, they don't get paid enough. There's so many people who don't get income security who would be, much more in a much better position if they had a basic income. So to me, ultimately, it's about freedom from fear, freedom from want, and dignity, which is what the basic premise of human rights is about. If we use human rights as a foundation for a basic income, then we may indeed see the basic income become a foundation for a new economy.
All right, once again, trying to create a conversation rather than like an Oxford-style debate. I'm not going to go to the opposing point of view just now. I'd like to make the conversation a little more specific. And Guy, ask you, you have a proposal, you're running on it. What is your proposal for basic income, and how does it meet the measure of what Josephine is describing?
Hello, everyone. I'm really glad to be here among you. The energy in the crowd is absolutely fantastic. I'd like to start by giving you probably the only statistic I'll give you tonight. 70% of those who are poor in Canada and adults are actually working. Knowing this, I think we can all agree that there is a social covenant that has been broken. When you're working, you certainly hope that your work is rewarding to yourselves, to your aspirations, to where you want to go. But it's also supposed to make you live. And when you're working full-time, part-time, and you're not able to fulfill your basic needs, there's a major problem that needs to be addressed. All of this is because, and you'll probably agree with this, all the restructuring of the economy that took place in the last 30 years with Reagan and Thatcher, with what's called the Washington Consensus, basically the wave towards privatization, deregulation, trade agreements that leave so many workers behind. And the economy is broken. We all realize that, and we need to fix it. We need to restructure the economy. We need to move towards an economy that's based on renewables and not on fossil fuels. But all of this transition won't happen overnight. And all of this transition will also create some pain, some dislocation, it will be transformative. And the idea of basic income is actually an idea that can actually help with this needed transition, and also can do something that we've been talking a lot about, but really haven't done much, which is eliminating poverty. As Josephine, and I fully agree with her, as she said, it's not a panacea, it's not the miracle pill that will solve all the problems, but it is a necessary step forward to actually allow for the demarginalization, the re-inclusion of so many people who have been left behind. Now, I'll be speaking maybe on a different plane as my co-panelist, because I'm talking about the federal basic income and not provincial, and I know about the pilot program that will be implemented here. But I do believe that we can actually implement not a universal, but a basic income that will actually allow every citizen of this country to reach at least the level of poverty. We're talking about the low-income cutoff, which is a measure that's established following what is needed to fulfill the basic needs: clothing, housing, and feeding, of course. So if we look at the federal structure right now, we have some basic income programs that exist. The Canada Child Benefit is a basic income program, basically for parents with kids. We have the guaranteed income supplement for seniors. To some extent, the working income tax benefit is the embryo of a basic income. So you already have it, and you have the structure of implementing that basic income federally through the Canada Child Benefit, for example. So what we could do is to actually use the tax system to ensure that every person working or on support receives a top-up of funding, unconditional, to actually go at least to the level of the low-income cutoff. And that's possible. And it can be done without having to cut programs. Of course, you can integrate all those targeted basic income programs, but nothing else needs to be touched. We don't need to actually reduce provincial support programs such as disability support or social assistance. We don't need to eliminate the EI. We can actually move in that direction. It won't be cheap. It will actually require significant investment. And it has to be done with some other measures that will accompany this, either to help fund it, or to actually ensure that it will be complemented by other needed transitional measures to actually restructure the economy. So all in all, it can be done. It can be done in a way that will, as I said, eliminate poverty. We don't need to be afraid. I understand the fears that we have that, liberals or conservatives can actually come with a program that will eliminate other programs. I understand this fear. If this happens, I'll be the first one to fight against such a scheme. But you know what? We've been conditioned in the last 20, 30 years by neoliberalism to fight against something. Basic income is not a question of should we do it or not. It's a question of when it will be done. And we'll have a choice of doing it as progressives for the right reasons, or to let liberals and conservatives do it for the wrong reasons and having once again to fight against something. So let's do it the right way.
Jessica is making it sound very reasonable. He even invoked the inevitability card, that this is going to happen. Are we going to do it right? Or are we going to let them do it their way? So what's your response?
Well, Avi, as a worker in Ontario's social assistance system, I understand the appeal of basic income. I can say, as somebody who navigates the realities of that system every day and watches our recipients navigate the realities of that system, nobody can claim that what we have right now is working. And nobody can claim that we are really in the taking into consideration the program that I work for, that there's really any support in the Ontario Disability Support Program. And that's true of social assistance programs across this country. But if we look at the arguments that John has laid out, it's incredibly clear to me that a basic income especially that fails to deal with the fundamental realities of the capital society that we live in, a society that still requires capital as the way that we put roofs over our heads, and put food on our tables. At best, basic income is a bandage on a gaping wound. And so we need to start by asking ourselves, how basic are we comfortable with a basic minimum income being? And so I want to draw our attention to the pilot that is planned here in the province of Ontario that actually sets the high watermark in a number of control groups that they're looking at the low income cutoff, which is estimated at approximately $1,320 or $1,320 a month. And that's the majority of participants wouldn't even receive that. The majority of participants would actually receive 75% of the low income cutoff, based on the pilot that they're proposing right now. And even at that stage, the proposal right now is that anybody who received that basic income and then had earned income, right, employment income that they received on top of that, would have that income taxed at a rate that's intended to reduce the net benefit to zero. So to take that language and boil it down, what we're saying is that the actual dollars left in the pockets of people who are receiving the basic income, the net difference is zero. The net difference of money in the pockets of the people who need it the most is zero. And systems like what is being proposed in Ontario, it's not just simply as simple as a good basic income and a bad basic income. The reality is that if we look at the political system and the capital system that we're living under, this is inevitably the kind of basic income that we're going to see. And this is supposedly the starting point. This is the testing point. When we look at what has happened to social assistance programs in Ontario as an example. Social assistance, now we call it Ontario Disability Support and Ontario Works. Previously, we've known it as general welfare or family benefits allowance. Whatever name you call it by, the intention was that it was to be the last step in a safety net. That there are a number of programs in Canada, including employment insurance, including workplace safety and insurance for those who are injured on the job, a number of other programs that are in place. But access to those programs has been cut and chipped away at and made harder and harder. And what has that done? It has driven up the rates of people who are relying on social assistance. Now, did the government respond to this by saying, well, obviously there are more people in need, and so we need to increase the amount of income and the amount of funding that are available to these programs? Absolutely not. They did the opposite. They said, well, more people are in need, but we're not willing to put any funding towards it, so I guess we're going to have to continue to put more and more draconian measures, right? Austerity by stealth. We're going to go in and find all the little parts of the program that we think if we can make cuts back on, we can continue to keep the program that we have. And so the program that we have deteriorates. It crumbles under massive underfunding and massive demand. But we need to look at the other piece of where this massive demand is coming from, and that's the reality that employers are expecting to be able to get away with not properly paying people for a day's work. I happen to be on the younger side, but I hear there was a time where a working wage was a living wage. And I also understand that that was not just a living wage for an individual, but for a family. Why is it that we have said not only is it acceptable to allow employers and to allow where the massive wealth of this country is concentrated to stay there and to subsidize? We are not subsidizing through a basic income, the average Canadian or the average Ontario. We're subsidizing the employer or that person who already has extreme income and extreme wealth at their disposal. We are subsidizing them by saying, don't worry, we'll take care of this fundamental basic, which already isn't enough to live on, by the way we've discussed. We are going to subsidize it, and we are going to take the responsibility out of the hands of the employers and the wealthy.
Fantastic work, everyone, on the opening salvo. And now I'm hoping that we can have a conversation now, and that you won't need me to ask every question. You can just talk amongst yourselves. But I felt that one moment in that first round that was striking, Josephine, was when you said to John that this is like, if they do a pilot in Ontario where they actually pay people social assistance that meets the poverty line, which no one in this country, even no government in this country even does right now, that this would be a powerful argument for everything else that we're fighting for. So as a movement question, how is an experiment in a program like this really setting us back?
Well, I'd say, first of all, we're talking about at the moment something that Hugh Siegel has put on the table and talked about and the government is considering. So we don't know what the government is going to do.
Right.
But I would confidently predict that if the Win Liberals are contemplating what they're going to do with income support, they are certainly not looking to shift the balance of forces in terms of income adequacy and make it less attractive for people to be forced into the lowest paying jobs on offer. They're going to continue to use their income support system as a bludgeon. And that's my fundamental point in all this, is we can have whatever vision we want, but visions don't solve the issue. We've got to deal with the actual political reality, the hostile forces. And I don't think just saying we could design basic income to be better really solves the problem.
But there are OCAP members right now who are getting a single person's social assistance in Ontario of $700 a month or less, and they would be getting almost twice that. How can you really argue against
no, they
the
wouldn't.
constituency that you've been fighting to raise rates for
But they
decades
wouldn't.
in the city?
A small group of people that they're going to test are going to get a somewhat elevated income for a period of time. And at the same time, it's going to be a mechanism to ensure that the rates are kept low for several years to come. I think that's the main attraction for the Liberal government at the moment, is another opportunity to stall the process.
I think that, in fact, it gives people a lot more incentive to fight harder, if you ask me. And I think that one of the reasons why a basic income is being touted as a way to try and reform the current systems is that pretty much everybody hates those systems, including the people who are on them. I mean, we might talk about $700.
Them like Jessica.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be really great to liberate social workers to actually help people. You can't help people who just don't have enough to live on. You know.
I do think it's incredibly important, though, to acknowledge that where these programs are being suggested, they're immediately out of the gate being suggested in such a way that we could eliminate the administrative or the bureaucratic infrastructure that comes around actually administering a program like that. With the basic income that's being proposed in Ontario, one of the very first questions on the public survey was, if we implemented a basic income, which of the other following public services could we get rid of? We have to be realistic about the lens through which governments are going to put this into place. And so they seem to be of the impression that there's some massive administrative savings. I've got to tell you that if you did do away with myself and all of my colleagues that deliver ODSP and all of my colleagues that deliver Ontario Works, we're looking at about 2.4%. 2.4% of what it costs to administer social assistance in Ontario right now. I don't know about you, but I don't know how that 2.4% is going to pay for, but it is being put out as if it is somehow a solution, a way that we're going to find this money.
The thing is, there's, about 300 people in this room?
I think it's like 6.
600 people in this room?
I think there's 6,000 people here.
You can turn the camera
Sorry, that
to
was
see.
the inauguration. Sorry.
I can... Fake news? I'm sure that I would be talking to each and every one of you, and I would probably get 300 different ways of doing basic income. We're not talking about the same thing. And I understand that most of the arguments that are being brought forth are about the pilot program that is about to be implemented, and I can understand that. And I can understand this is set up by a Liberal government with the help of a former Progressive Conservative senator. I can get that. We can fight that until the end of times. And I think we should, if the intent is to actually replace the existing programs and to actually commodify services that currently are a right of citizenship. I understand that. The question that I'm putting forth is, are we going to be simply resisting anything Liberals and Conservatives want to set up, or are we going to try to plan something of our own? We've been... Back in the 90s, I was in the student movement. I was fighting against the cuts of Paul Martin and Jean Chrétien to post-secondary education, to healthcare, to social assistance. And we've been in that mode for the last 20 years. Now, it's time to think differently. It's time to think of what we can do, what we can put forth, like we did for Medicare, like we did for OAS, like we did for pensions. Ideas that the NDP or that progressives can actually put forth to build a new hope for Canadians. And basic income, while not a magical pill, is actually an important step if it's designed well and for the right reasons, which is to eliminate poverty.
So I'm having a slight cognitive dissonance here, listening to the lofty way that you're selling it and looking at your proposal, which is just to top up a couple of federal tax credits to bring people to, again, to the low-income cutoff. In other words, what we define, Statistics Canada defines, as poverty. So you have me on the first part. Let's propose really bold and ambitious measures to transform society rather than always being on the defensive. But your proposal doesn't seem to fit that level of ambition to me. It actually, as Sean has been saying, we have a drastically unequal society. So we need to change the balance of forces, right? We have an incredible concentration of wealth in the top. And until we get access to that money that's been sucked out of the public sphere, we're not really talking about change if we just help people survive with tax credits.
I do understand this argument, and I said at the beginning, and I said during my introduction of the idea of basic income, that it has to be one step with other measures. We need to restructure the economy. We need to restructure the tax system. We'll have lots of restructuring to do to undo all the changes that took place in the last 30 years. That's a given, and that has to happen. What I'm suggesting right now, and as I said, it won't be cheap. We're talking about a measure that will be expensive, but that will actually allow for every citizen of this country to achieve that low-income cutoff, which about 6 million Canadians don't achieve right now. There's not a single program that has been able to do that, and we cannot hope that provincially we will see a government doing it in this manner. You talk about social assistance. Any type of program that will be bringing you there is not something that's on the plans right now. But if you're looking at basic income federally, done by the federal government, through the tax system, using what exists right now in terms of mechanisms or the mechanics of it, we can actually achieve this. And it might only be the beginning of something better, but at least we'll be getting that first hurdle, which will to eliminate abject extreme poverty in this country, which we still have too much of.
Jessica, are you buying any of this? Like the federal approach can heal the wounds of austerity that is imposed provincially as well?
Well, I heard a sort of implore to hope, and I wish I was as hopeful as Guy. But no, to be honest, I'm not really buying it. I know that we're looking at a system right now where the process of transfers, federal to provincial transfers, is a process of extreme, disagreement. Just going about trying to get proper mental health funding passed, has been absolute chaos.
Sorry, guys, that was my mom. Do you mind if I take it? It's on the emergency list that rings it.
And so I absolutely do love being able to look at the idea of a basic income as some sort of overall solution. But the reality is that basic income will not be implemented in a vacuum. It'll be implemented in the reality of the system that we exist in today. I would very much love to see a progressive government at the helm that could look at real measures to deal with income inequality. But at this stage, what I'm seeing is propping up of income inequality by continuing to allow those that have the greatest means not to have a responsibility to pay their fair share. We've acknowledged that this would be an incredibly expensive program, and we haven't actually talked about where we think that's going to be paid for from. And I'm sorry, personally, I don't trust that the same governments at provincial level or at federal level who have shown an absolute fixation with we must bring in corporate investment, an absolute fixation with we should privatize because somehow that's going to make things better despite all evidence to the contrary. We haven't talked about how we're going to pay for it, and we somehow trust that those same people are going to go to those with extreme wealth, it's going to go to those that we've allowed to call themselves job creators, and that they're going to say, oh, it's your time to pay your fair share now? I'm sorry, I'm not hopeful, and I don't buy it.
Well, so there's two men. Josephine, I want you to come back in, but I think there's something worth keeping in mind there. There's two men in Canada, the two richest men in Canada, Galen Weston and David Thompson. Is it David, I think? The billionaires, who control as much wealth, according to the recent Oxfam study, as a third of us. So 2 guys control as much wealth as like 10 million Canadians. That's where the money's gone, into those corporate tax cuts and those, into that inequality that's fueled their extreme wealth. Are we going to be able to do this without challenging that system?
No. What I think of, though, is that if we can take advantage of the fact that there is support for basic income on both the left and the right, or both those who are have traditional values and those who have progressive values, this is a broader spread politically than we've had on any other issue in a very long time. I think we really do need something to fight for instead of continually fighting against. It's been a losing battle for a very long time, and I can't say that the fight against has done any good for me, my family, my community, or Syrian refugees for that matter. I think that if we fight for adequate basic income and they bring it in as a way to try and fool us or whatever, it nonetheless provides a beachhead from which we can continue to fight and expand out the support for it when we show people that entrepreneurs and farmers and refugees and people who want to try something different in their life or start a co-op will now be able to benefit from this. All of a sudden, the proportion of society that would be in favor of it is going to be far broader than people who consider themselves as potential welfare recipients. I mean, welfare has become so denigrated as a concept and is such a horrendous experience that nobody wants to be associated with it. If we come up with a new idea, it then becomes a whole new struggle. It becomes a whole new argument. And I think that more and more since Occupy and other horrible realities, like the fact that 85 people now have the wealth of 3 billion people globally, just as 2 have such a wealth in Canada, people are seeing this now. So now if you put a positive idea on the table, if you put a goal on the table rather than a complaint, I think you're going to get a lot more energy and a lot more motivation for people to fight for it. And I think in terms of how are we going to pay for it, well, no, how are we going to pay for an increase in welfare? Obviously, we have to do a lot of things, as Guy was saying, to change the way our economy is functioning at the moment. It's interesting that they could suddenly find billions of dollars to bail out the banks in an instant, but it finds it so difficult to do this. However, if those in the sort of on the economic side see it as an efficiency measure, and those on the human rights side see it as a dignity measure, then you find finally something that people can agree on and fight for something to get better. Because, I mean, really, landlords need people to be able to pay rent, but we also obviously have to have rent control, right? People need to be able to purchase decent, healthy food. We can't, rely on Mexican labor forever to get our food in the wintertime. How are we going to pay for that food? Well, if the farmers and the consumers both have more money, then we're more likely to have a healthy food system. But none of these things can happen in our current situation. So in a way, the big could be our stealth instrument to start pushing the edges and pushing forward to something far more realistic. Because otherwise, I do believe that one of the reasons that some of the corporate comptrollers are starting to look at the basic income is out of panic, recognizing that we're this close to violent revolution, and perhaps they would prefer something a little more evolutionary that isn't going to have us mobbing and swarming over their walls.
Okay, here we go now. Here we go. Speaking of revolution, John, did you want to say something?
I'm a little less hopeful of the immediate prospects for revolution, although I fully endorse the event. But there's something in what Josephine said that candidly sets off alarm bells. And it's not Josephine's personal point. This notion of the lion lying down with the lamb is something that emerges in the whole basic income discourse. Guy Standing from London, England, not that it's wrong to be from London, England, is an individual who heads up the Basic Income Earth Network, and he was recently in Davos selling the idea. And unfortunately, he epitomizes this notion that the 1% is coming around and there's some common ground here and we can work things out. And he's become inadvertently the kind of the Bono of basic income. And
the unkindest cut of all.
And
well done.
And that's, I think, a real danger. Because I believe at root, what we're dealing with basic income, for all its radical ideas, is an actually incredibly conservative notion. What it wants is a payment that leaves everything intact. And you want to talk about being bold. I think we can be much more bold than basic income. We can't have a revolution tomorrow, but I think we can take ourselves in the direction of social transformation by fighting to actually have an influence on what goes on in this society. We can fight for free and expanded public services. And when it comes to income support, in this city at the moment, they're proposing libraries without librarians. What an obscenity. We should be fighting for maximum worker community control of public services. Right? And when it comes to the income support things, I'm not in favour of the rituals of degradation and the moral policing and the grossly inadequate income. I've been fighting it all my life. We need to fight for full entitlement. We need to fight for adequate income. And we need to fight for real services being provided for people instead of that moral policing. And those things can all be taken up and we can fight for those things. We don't want to shop till we drop in the neoliberal marketplace with a basic income. We want something better than that.
Where's all that income coming from, Brian?
Josephine, go ahead, and then Guy.
I don't want to shop till we drop either, but like my daughter is working in the insurance industry only because she had to make enough money to pay her student loan and survive and feed her child, and her partner is a truck driver. Both of them are about to be automated out of existence. And this idea that automating half of our workforce is somehow going to magically, be stabilized by more different kinds of who knows what sort of employment really bothers me. Like, I don't think we have answers. I hear what you're saying, and I agree with you 100%, except for what are we fighting for? What is that sort of, beachhead position that we can utilize to build from and build forward? When I say I want an adequate basic income, I'm not saying I want an adequate basic income so that corporations can hire people for less. However, most of our jobs are provided by small businesses, and they cannot pay their employees enough because the rents are too high, because the fees, the taxes, the this, the that, the everything else cuts into what they can pay their employees. Lots of co-ops and small employers would love to pay people properly. However, they could hire and employ a lot more people if there was a basic income, and if what you did as a livelihood and what you did to express and carry out meaning, creativity in your life wasn't the only thing that provided a roof over your head, then we could do a lot more creative things together. And then we could also say, screw your lousy job. I'm not going to take your stupid job because I don't need it. So I'm going to go to the employer over here who's actually going to provide me with health benefits. These things are going to be a lot more possible as our economy constantly goes through this ever-increasing turbulent change.
This is really getting to a really core point. I think this is in some ways the crux of the debate. Does basic income give workers more power, the way Josephine has just described, or does it destroy workers' power, the way John is arguing? In fact, if we're talking about movement building, if we're talking about building the political pressure inside the existing system for transformative change, this is a key question. So let's turn the debate to that question about the impact of basic income on the power of workers. Guy.
Well, right now, if you want a job that's fulfilling, that is actually responding to your aspirations. If you are working and not even able to meet your basic needs, you need to take any job that comes that will actually help you to supplement maybe what you have in terms of social support. It doesn't work that way. I think Josephine is actually right by saying that at least when your basic needs, when you know that you'll have food on the table, you'll know you're going to have a roof on your head, when you'll know that you'll have some clothing, then you don't need to worry about those. And you can actually, you have more freedom, not perfect freedom, but you have more freedom to actually get that job, get that employment, get that function that will respond to your aspirations. Right now, in the current context, you don't have a choice. And that's wrong, and this is what we need to change. And I'd like to just go back to one point Josephine made, and it is the fact that this is not a choice of one or the other. It's not a choice of basic income or restructuring the economy. It's both at the same time. One doesn't preclude the other, and I've seen a lot of the argument going in that direction, and I can understand it, because we've been on a defensive for so long, and we're fearful of what liberals, conservatives, neoliberals will actually put together. And we know that it won't be for our own good. But fully agree that we need to change our way of thinking and think of what we can develop as progressives, what we can develop for the common good, for this society, what's the vision that we want to put forth. And if we can actually do it with the help of basic income, I think everybody will be winning, and in the end, it will actually be part of that restructuring that we need in the society.
I wish I believed that it wasn't an either-or, and again, in an ideal scenario, it wouldn't be an either-or proposition. But the reality is, we need to look at the time that the basic income pilot in Ontario got proposed. Happens to be right around the same time that in an incredible movement here in Ontario, the Fight for 15 and Fairness, has actually been making real strides. If you want to talk about...
Yes. Fight for 15 and Fairness. Correct.
If you want to talk about a positive movement that's about building workers' rights, we have it. It's underway right now. It's been making incredible gains. And yet, when we are just getting to the point that the pressure is building on the government, a government that is incredibly unpopular in part because they've continued to make decisions that will only increase inequality in this province and in this country, when we take a look at that reality, what we are seeing is that we are stripping away the power of employees. We are stripping away the power of employees by undermining the ability to unionize. We are stripping away the power of employees by saying we, as employers, need an endless source of contingent work. We need an endless source of people that we can call on at a snap of a finger to do the work. And we don't think we should bear the responsibility, the financial responsibility that says that those workers should be able to make a living whether they get paid, whether they get called into the workplace or not. Again, I have to go back to, if we want to build real power amongst workers, we build that power by giving them the ability to fight in their workplaces through their unions, by giving them a living wage, by ensuring that at the end of the day, they can sit down at a bargaining table and bargain fairly with their employer. That's the absolute opposite of what basic income does. Basic income completely disconnects the income that people have from their workplace and from their employer's responsibility to them. And I understand what Josephine is saying in terms of small businesses, but we need to keep in mind that actually more than half of all minimum wage earners in this country are working for huge multinationals. So
multinationals are the only place that can afford to open huge stores, et cetera, et cetera. The only place that can roll these kind of things out anymore. I mean, there's so many, even if it's a $15 an hour wage, there's a lot of people who can't make it on that, especially if it's a part-time job and they have no protection. The thing is that people I know on the system can't afford to leave the system for a job, for a part-time job, because it's not going to support them. And then they can't afford to go back and forth. They can't take the risk. Do you know what a nightmare it is to try to start a business when you're on social assistance? Do you know what you have to go through? No one's going to give you a loan. No one's going to help you get a business started. And now you're just going to risk everything in your entire life so you can get off social assistance and start a business, but it might take 2 years before that business can pay you. Meanwhile, people are terrified to even try. So basically, our choices are so extremely limited. And what upsets me about what you're saying is that, to me, from my perspective, if you have the freedom to work with and for whom and in which way you choose, you have much greater ability to strike. You have much stronger ability to unionize because they can't stop you anymore. And that should be how it is for all of us, you know?
I want to give them a chance to respond to that very forceful point.
Well, I mean, I think that's the whole point, is that, yes, what Josephine identifies is precisely the economic coercion that is built into the neoliberal phase of capitalism. It was designed very carefully. They've worked on it for decades. And that's the state of affairs that exists. But the point about it is, it's very deliberate, and they're very committed to it, and they like it a lot, and they intend to make it worse. And there isn't a social policy end run around it. The Fight for 15 comes up. That's the vital lesson, is if we're going to stop this, we're going to stop it by mobilising working class people and poor people and by fighting back. But we're not going to do it through some They're not going to do it for us. They're not going to enact a policy of equity and justice. That just doesn't happen. It doesn't happen in Hollywood, and it won't happen here.
Well, it kind of sometimes does happen in Hollywood. I just want to reframe this heated part of the conversation, because I think the question of workers' power is central, but so is the question of what movements put their muscle behind. So I do feel that there might be some common ground here that I think John and Jessica have acknowledged. If we were fighting for something that was a game changer, that actually required major redistribution of wealth from where it's accumulated at the top to the rest of us, that really changed the balance of forces in society, maybe this basic income thing would be something worth fighting for. And what you're hearing is proposals that work on a completely different theory of change, to use a trendy idea, that somehow the elites are going to hand it to us. Obviously, this is something that needs to be fought for, right? I think everybody agrees on that. So the question is that to do it right, it's going to require mobilizing, right? The Wynne government in Ontario has had plenty of chances to take people out of poverty and to systematically address the social crises in this province. They clearly don't want to do it. So how are we going to make them is the question, right? If there is, so the question from a movement point of view is this the battle? Is this the issue? Is this the demand that could bring together a movement of movements that would be a game changer? And I think the onus is on, if you see it from, I'm just recasting this as a movement question. If you see it as a movement question, should this be the big one? Then I think the onus is on the proponents of basic income to say, this is a kind of a policy that can change the game, that people from across the spectrum of issues can get behind, that is really going to be one that is transformational. Can you make that case? Or is it this is a step that's worth taking, and then we have to be honest that we're talking about incrementalism?
Well, I don't have the patience for incrementalism, but what I would like to know is, I hear that we have, ultimately the same kind of goal. I hear your concerns about who currently is in power and is trying to bring this in their own little way, for whatever purpose. What I don't hear is, what's your alternative? I mean, the $15 an hour movement is great for a certain class of people who can go out and work all day. What about women's unpaid work? What about all the community work? What about all the cultural work that's not being paid for? How does $15 an hour affect that? Like, our economy, our whole economic model is built, believe it or not, the Standard Accounting System of Nations at the United Nations specifically states that the work of women in family and community is of no value. If a basic income starts to value that and recognize that everybody deserves to have what they need to meet their basic needs, then how on earth does that not empower much, much more people than simply workers who can go and work in the labor force? How does that not help? And if we're not, if we don't have something to fight for, a goal to achieve, we're simply saying, well, we can help this little group this way and this little group that way, and we continue to be divided. If we're fighting for a universal, adequate level of income, we can continually fight to make sure that it is adequate. We can say that it'll be more adequate when food is more affordable. It'll be more adequate when housing is controlled and is provided in a reasonable way. There are hundreds of ways to make it adequate. One of the reasons I've been able to keep my family together and be an activist is because I had rent geared to income. Like, not every single policy that's come forward was always bad. Sometimes you can use it for good. So I'm just saying, like, if we have targets to fight for, and we don't oversimplify and say, well, the basic income is the only thing, and we're not going to talk about anything else, I've never said that. To me, if I run myself down through the economic, social, and cultural rights, I see where basic income can answer and be a tool in achieving so many of those rights. Even if it's because we're saying it's going to cover your basic needs. You still have to go and find other creative ways to earn some money if you want to go and, take a big vacation, or if you want to, get some, unusual health support or something like that. Like, there's so many things that people will still need money for. But at least, for once, you won't do anything at all, including humiliate yourself in front of, humiliate yourself in front of a welfare worker in order to prove that you somehow deserve this pathetic little amount of money.
I think Josephine has an incredible way of speaking from the heart and from her personal experience, but I think in there was also a picture of a movement of movements approach to a demand that can assist in other campaigns, and that gives a kind of a vision of the world we're fighting for. So, Jessica, I think you are a welfare worker. So, what do you say?
There's absolutely no doubt that this sort of mentality of the worthy and the unworthy poor is one of the realities that's built into our system right now, and it's something that we desperately need to do something about. But it's also a system right now that sets up an assumption that if somebody is on Ontario disability support or if somebody qualifies as somebody with a disability, that they're unable to work. In fact, in a lot of cases, and certainly there are people that are going to be in need of assistance financially that aren't going to be able to work. But what we're seeing instead is that programs like Ontario Disability Support and programs like Ontario Works are actually being used as stopgaps because we are not requiring employers to do the work that they need to be doing of accommodating people who are perfectly capable of being in the workforce. And so that's another reality that basic income continues to allow us to say, if somebody isn't the absolute ideal, worker, no, that's fine. You can go ahead and continue to live on the very, very basic income that we're supposing is going to be a solution, is going to be. And I do want to talk about also this because you're absolutely right. When it comes down to unpaid work, right? The work that very often falls on women. I have to come back to another reality I see, which is we know that the types of work that are chronically underpaid in this province and in this country tend to be work that are done by women. So this is paid work, but work done by women. Childcare, healthcare. And more women continue to have to make the decision. Even now, it baffles my mind that my mother had to make these kinds of calls 30 years ago, and I'm having to make these calls now as I plan my own family, whether to opt out of employment because childcare is more expensive than what you would make by working. Well, to me, if anything, what the basic income does is it helps cement that. It helps cement the idea that, let's be honest, overwhelmingly women, well, you've got your basic income so you can stay home and continue to do the elder care and continue to do the child care. I don't see how that actually moves forward our debate in terms of getting work that is funded, but this is primarily done by women, to be equally paid. We just passed Equal Pay Day in this province, and again, decades later, the same fights that my mother was fighting in terms of equal pay are being fought for now. Basic income will not do anything to help to bring equal pay into our reality. And if anything, what it does, it continues to encourage women especially to choose to opt out of the workforce. And that's a huge concern to me.
But once again, I don't understand why we're saying it's one or the other. It's not basic income or universal childcare. It's not basic income or pharmacare. It can be both. It can be all. If we want it to be, we can actually go in that direction and not exclude this important component of what will be the transformation of our society and of our economy, because that's coming. And we'll be facing a wall soon with the Liberals and Conservatives having brought us there in the last 30 years. We'll be facing that wall where, with automation, with the fact that the finance minister is telling us that we have to get used to the job churn. I mean, if we don't stop, we'll be facing that wall, and we'll have to start from a world, an economy, a society in shambles from the start. We have to rebuild something. Or we can actually take matters in our own hand and being able to fight, to ensure the people who can't live right now, that they will at least be able to meet those basic needs. Because I agree that we need to actually strengthen labor. We need to give more power to the workplace. We need to ensure that we have those programs that will actually help everyone in our society, and that have been cut by those successive governments. It doesn't preclude that I can actually fight to get that program to help the 55-year-old worker who's been laid off from a mill in my riding and can't find work because he's 55 and he feels that nobody will give him a chance to actually retrain. So there's all those individual realities that we need to take care of. And as I said, basic income is not the magical solution, but it's a necessary step to actually alleviate the extreme poverty we have right now.
But your proposal is to offer that person the poverty line. And we're talking about this in the context of an aspirational demand that can mobilize people across a spectrum of different movements.
We have 6 million people who are currently under that poverty line. And if we are just telling them, you know what, we'll take care of you and we'll take care of your situation when we are able to retransform society, well, they won't be taken care of. I understand the goals. I understand it's laudable. I want to fight for that as well. I don't want to leave the 6 million people under the line of poverty. We can fix that right now.
Actually, I would say that if we want to really talk in terms of pushing back and making a difference, probably a very bad move would be to say that for all those people who are low paid, the way to address it is through a payment out of the general tax revenues that brings them up. Actually, I think that is a way to institutionalize and intensify working poverty. Surely the answer is to put the responsibility on employers to pay living wages to people. Surely that's the answer. Surely that's the way forward. And it comes back to the same basic point with regards to basic income. If this Solomonic crowd were the final arbiters of what basic income might look like, then there might be a case to be made for it. But we are not the ones designing basic income. Going all the way back to Milton Friedman and indeed further, right-wing thinkers have understood the value of a commodified system of social provision. They're working on it now. They're planning it now. Those evil bastards in the Swiss Alps were thinking about it. They know what they're doing, and it's coming down the pipes, and it's an attack. And it's not going to be sweetness and light, and we can't turn it around. And in terms of fighting to make a difference under this system as best we can until we can change it, there are so many more things that we can struggle for that offer so many more possibilities for working class people and communities.
For working class people who can't work?
Indeed,
just saying.
including
really?
working class.
Really? So we're just going to add a couple of dollars to ODSP, and we're going to add a couple of dollars to OW. And just, by the way, yeah, Milton Friedman thought it up. So did Martin Luther King. So did Thomas Paine. This goes back to 1500s. This idea has been pushed from all kinds of angles by all kinds of people. And again, because it is there is no one answer, right? But as a fundamental core or piece of something much broader that allows us to innovate, to transition, to let people make new choices. I mean, listen, maybe you feel that, women are going to be more trapped into this. I don't understand that at all. I know for one thing, if there had been a basic income and I didn't have to be beholden to workers and criteria and eligibility and blah, blah, blah. When I was an abused spouse, I would have been able to take my basic income, pick up and go to another town or another house and have a new life. I would have just gone and done it. I would have had the money for the kids, for me, not a problem. Same goes for those shitty jobs. Like, who are all those employers who are going to be able to pay a living wage? We don't live in an economy that's actually able to do that right now. I'm trying to start a business. I want to start a business with my friends who are on social assistance, and I want us not to have to sneak around and pretend we're not doing it, et cetera, et cetera. I want us to be able to simply do it. And then if and when we actually achieve a level of income where we no longer need our basic income, I'm sure we'll be happy to plow it back in. Or maybe we'll force the government to say, you should have your deductions exempted because you've invested it in a business. Whatever. It's a way easier foundation to be fighting from than the one we have now, which is totally and utterly broken.
But the people who have brought us austerity social programs and austerity minimum wages will be bringing us austerity basic income.
Yeah, well, we once thought we couldn't ever manage to get health care either, but we did.
But Josephine, I'm struck by this because you have been you've been in, I met you 20 years ago, around the time you started this work, or you were already into it, and you have been in this province and lived on and off social assistance, and members of your family still do, and you know that for the next 3 years, every time there's a demand for a dignified life for the working poor people of this province, this government is going to be able to point to their basic income pilot and say, of course, we agree with you. And that's why we're piloting this innovative, next generation, 21st century holistic solution. And you know that they're going to use this to do nothing for the next 3 years.
Or...
And I know you're impatient.
Or...
So you haven't confronted that.
Or, sure, fine. Or they won't do a pilot. They'll continue to dicker around and put in another 2% here and a 2% there for the next 3 years, and there'll be nothing to work with and nothing to fight for and nothing to look towards after that. Whereas if they do the pilot, as I said, they are therefore openly, politically confessing that the current system is inadequate. For the first time, there'll be something that says, oh, look, it's actually not good enough. And then, whether it's a LICO or a market basket, recognizing that Toronto's twice as expensive as the rest of the province, whatever that measure is, we are now starting to have the argument on the basis of what is actually adequate. And we've also admitted politically that everybody getting a job, everybody being able to get a job, good paying or not, is the answer to poverty, which it isn't anymore, and it won't be. So to me, even if they're just piloting it for a little while, ultimately, if we don't see an improvement and expansion of that, if it doesn't become universal, we can take it to court.
And we will have lost 3 years while they piloted it.
And what
said
are they
were
going to
doing
do in the
something.
3 years if they don't pilot? Is this government going to suddenly turn around and double social assistance because they decided not to pilot the basic income? I don't think so.
I'll tell you what we would say.
I tell you what we'd say about the particular pilot is that, like all the pilots, they're not really testing basic income, they're testing poor people. What they propose to do is to take a group of people, give them a bit more money, make them a bit less poor, and I think they're going to discover they're a bit better off. And so the answer is a very simple one right now. What Hugh Segal proposes, give it to every single person on social assistance in the province this moment. Don't worry about testing basic income. Just do it right now.
We might have actually reached a point of agreement on the panel. I want to seize this moment right
John,
now.
I'm totally with you,
See, I
and
told
I
you,
would
I think we would.
demand that any moment, and not just everybody on social assistance, though. Let's also not forget all those people who have no support whatsoever. Let's not forget, my partner who's trying to make a living in the music industry, who has the most chronically insecure. They make less money now than they did in the 80s, dollar for dollar. I'd like to see him get that. I'd like to see lots of people get a basic income. Let's fight for them all to get a basic income so we have some freedom of choice. Because if you give that basic income to my community, based on the co-op that we're building and the time bank that we're building and the work that we're doing, I can guarantee you that between my community residents and the farmers that we're working with, within 3 years, my community and those farmers will all be better off, and they'll be able to actually make a decent living doing what they believe in a climate-resilient food security project, rather than waiting around for some future thing to happen. They would actually be able to do that if they had that basic income temporarily. And I hope that whatever community it is does a really great job. But whether they do or not, we all have to fight for us all to have a basic income. But isn't it easier to fight for us all to have a basic income than to fight in a million different directions for a million little things?
I'm going to open up to the audience. You'll have a chance to respond. So I think the moment that everything changed for me in this debate, and I think most of you missed it, was when John actually referred to you as a Solomonic audience. That if this Solomonic audience were to design the basic income, he had faith in you. I'm going to offer the panel a chance for last thoughts in the manner that Michael just had his eloquent outburst. There are probably things that you've been really, really wanting to say that you haven't had the chance yet. Don't repeat yourselves, dig deep. Okay, repeat yourselves. That's part of the format. We're going to have a round of last thoughts, and then we will have an exercise in fake democracy, where we will have a chance to vote again. That in this question of the Solomonic audience, there's a lot riding on your choice tonight, and we also have we're going to have one announcement. I'm preparing you for it now. Is everyone ready for this final round? I'm excited. Let's see. Let's just reverse the order that we went in originally, when I think that Jessica went last. Are you ready to go first?
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
So one of the things that I heard sort of directed at us was, it's not either or. We can have all of these different. We can fight for childcare. We can fight for a basic income. We can fight for a minimum wage. We can fight for all of these things at the same time. But then I also heard from the other side of the panel that we need one thing to cement ourselves behind. We need one thing that is going to drive people. And so I would submit that when it comes to a demand, it's not going to be a demand that placates people. It's going to be a demand that makes people angry and ready to stand up and ready to fight back and ready to be mobilized. And unfortunately, I don't think basic income is that demand. I think basic income, if anything, ties people back into a system that says we are okay with the fact that the vast majority and growing of wealth and income in our society belongs to a very small few. We're okay with that so much so that we're going to prop it up and we're going to use basic income as a method to prop it up. And so I would say if we need one thing for us to be behind, it needs to be the growth of workers' rights. It needs to be demanding power in the workplace, and that is going to be by coalescing ourselves behind something like the Fight for 15 and Fairness. And so I strongly encourage you that that is the way forward. That is the way that we are going to fight inequality in this society. And I thank you for being part of this tonight.
Thank you. Guy.
We all have our thinking or our opinion of what economic inequalities are. But poverty is actually a very simple concept to understand. It's a lack of money. And poverty can be structural, it can be systemic, but it's still the question that people don't have enough money to be able to fulfill basic needs in the system that we have. Should we change the system? We'll eventually have to, because we're facing a wall. Automation is part of it, yes, but it's also the fact that with automation, or even with the fact that we are paying our workers less and less and less, people won't have the money to actually buy the goods that are being produced in any case. And this is the reality that the changes that we've experienced in the last 30 years have brought us to. So we'll need to change the system. We'll need to transform it again from the transformation that we've been through over the last 30 years. Basic income will be part of those changes, and it has to be, because it won't happen overnight. And those changes will actually bring some pain as well, the way that the last 30 years of changes have brought us pain. So we don't see, and I think Josephine will agree with this, basic income as being cement for the movement that we need to build. It is a solution to a very immediate problem, which is the fact that 6 million Canadians, many of them kids, are actually living in poverty right now. And that if we are just hoping that by doing these changes in terms of the minimum wage, in terms of the labor rights and the labor strength relationship with the employer, that will solve that problem. It won't, because that's a problem that we have the means to actually solve. And I do understand that there's fears about this Ontario pilot program, and I understand it because it comes from a place where I don't think the rationale is actually good. We can actually work to design, and this is what I want to do with the NDP. This is what I want to do as a progressive economist, which is to try to bring something we can do right now for those people who need the help. And that doesn't prevent us from changing the system for a better system.
Very nice. It is a consequential question for our host who gets to go last. But John, I'm sorry, I'm actually more afraid of Josephine. So she's getting the last word. I've known her for a longer time.
Well, I mean, it's been put forward that we can design a system of basic income that would work for us, that would be redistributive, and in truth, we can design anything. But the reality is what is coming down the pipes. And if you look at the writings of a US political scientist like Charles Murray, you get a pretty good sense of what they would like to design, and they are the people in power. And it's a system that's going to provide a small dwindling payment. It's going to be used to reinforce low-wage work, and Murray is most insistent, and the Fraser Institute has recently said the same thing. The issue is it doesn't augment, it replaces. The basic payment doesn't count for a lot if the systems that used to be public services are being privatised. If your healthcare is gone, if your drug card is gone, if public transit is being wiped out, if social housing is being wiped out. And I suggest that it's a system that lends itself precisely to a pre-privatisation commodification. There is no social policy end run around the problems of austerity. They're very committed to austerity. To the extent that we can push back, it will be through social mobilisation, and to the extent to which we can change things, it will require social transformation. That is the reality. It's a harsh reality, but it's the truth.
Josephine.
Well, I think that we have come to a point in human history where we are facing basically extinction or evolution. And if we don't evolve, we are not going to be around very much longer. And I don't think that those of us in the progressive left are the only people who understand that. I know that $80 billion at least is what we have to spend around dealing with the costs of poverty. I know a lot of people understand that the cost of poverty has increased our capacity to keep up. I think that, as much as there are evil people in support of it, there's also an awful lot of good people. I think that if we fight for a basic income that is based on human rights, that is embedded in human rights principles, which this country is already obligated to respect, I think if we look at the fact that countries around the world, including Canada, signed the 17 global goals, the first of which is the eradication of poverty, I think we are at a political moment where there is enough popular support for the redistribution of wealth in a serious way that would actually support taking wealth back from the corporate sector in a way that hasn't been possible for a long time. I think that this political moment where we have people from both sides of the spectrum, whether they be traditional, anarchistic, et cetera, agreeing that everybody must have enough and we must change and shift inequality, we are at a time where a basic income that is actually adequate, that is accompanied by things like rent control, that is a part of a much bigger fight for human rights, becomes a much easier fight to have than a fight such as my friend on the other side is proposing, which I still have yet to hear a single demand that would help bring together all these people. It sounds so much to me like the way in which, but the NDP and the Liberals have been going on and on about working families, which leaves me out. I'm a grandmother. What am I? Garbage? I think I have a lot to offer society. I think I should get a basic income so I can continue to do the work that I do, and in dignity, and without having to be afraid that my ODSP is going to be somehow cut off by accident, as it has been several times in the last few years. I don't think that these people that you're so worried about are suddenly going to get a ha-ha moment and be nice and fix welfare in a good way. It's not going to happen. So let's look at the people who are not workers, whether they're children or grandparents. Let's look at everybody and say if everybody has a basic income, maybe now we have the strength and the capacity and a reason and a cause and a model and a plan to redistribute wealth in a way that actually allows us to move forward and evolve.
Yay. I also gave Josephine the last word because she's awesome. She's just a good closer, just a great closer. I feel tonight like I have agreed with almost everything, and I'm not quite sure what to do with that because the points have been so beautifully expressed with such passion and such integrity and with such a clear-eyed view of the system that we actually live in. So I think this little vote we're going to do, which I was being glib and saying that it was fake democracy, is actually an important one. Let's take a moment and really reflect on what we've heard tonight. It's been an exceptionally smart and grounded conversation about this very important issue. So, everyone who is still on the fence, raise your hand. I think there are fewer people undecided than when we started this evening. Panel, do you agree? All right, so minds have been changed here tonight. Folks, if you support basic income after what you've heard tonight, hold up the green card and the red cards. The green, there were probably 3/4 green to start with. I feel like the instruction is clear. If you're against basic income, I want to see red. If you're for it, I want to see green. Is that clear? Thank you. Thank you for correcting me.
I think it's about the same.
What do you guys think? It's about the same. It's about the same. But I see different people who are holding up colors.
Can you just ask a question?
Josephine has a question for the Solomonic audience.
Okay.
We're in overtime now, so it's all good.
If the government was required to respect human rights, and that was the frame within which a basic income was brought into place, how many of you would be in favor?
Re-vote on a human rights frame. If basic income was tied to a human rights frame. Now we have unanimity. People who are against that, there's still someone who's against using the human rights frame to frame basic income. Courage. Well done. I just want to pause right here at the end of tonight to thank you, the audience, for patience, for focus, and just for being awesome. It was a wonderful night. All right.